Hello, I'm here today at the Iris Respite House, and we are having a caregiver roundtable discussion with Gallagher Hospice. I have with me today Jane Bartham and also Megan Anderson, and I just have to get a little personal here. I just think it's amazing how we've reconnected, from our days back at Harmony Hospice. All three of us worked together there. Both of you, I think, were in marketing there, correct? If I remembered correctly, yes. And just, I don't know, I just fell in love with who you guys are and what you stand for. And I'm so glad that we've been able to reconnect in a different, you're both now in hospice with Gallagher Hospice, and I'm now the founder and executive director of Hope Grows. So I'm glad you are partnering with us this year, and having you in our space here today at the house is just amazing.
It's an honor and a privilege, and it is fun to see where our career
Yes.
has taken us since then.
Correct.
And each of us still really in that role of caregiving in one way or another.
Yes. I think once a nurturer, always a nurturer, right?
Well,
What do you think, Jane?
What's incredible to see with you, Lisa, is when we would have first met, you had initial ideas.
Yes.
And you had here, now, and now we're where you are. And that has been incredible for your evolution over the years to meet your goal and what you wanted to do.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't know. I think I've always had a soft spot for caregivers, and it seemed right. And plus, too, there was a little bit of divine intervention that happened from my late father, which I think you all are aware of that story. But so to get started, if you wouldn't mind just talking about, yourself a little bit and what you do for Gallagher Hospice, and share about Gallagher Hospice and, some things that maybe our viewers and our listeners would want to know.
Certainly. As Lisa said, my name is Megan. I am the executive director for Gallagher Hospice. We are a small community-based hospice. We started about 5 years ago now, almost. I've been there a little over 3 years. Jane has been there pretty much since the inception. And the aim of Gallagher really was to be a community-based hospice that would provide the best possible care we could for patients and families, so that they might reach the end of their life's journey with peace and dignity. So we do provide service in southwestern PA in about 8 counties, primarily Beaver, Allegheny, and into Westmoreland, down into Washington County as well. And we too have grown like you have over the last few years. So I think we're pretty pleased with the care that we have been privileged to provide right here in our community. And we really have a pretty amazing group of staff. As you mentioned, Jane and I have had the wonderful privilege of working together for years and years now in different roles. And by background, I am a social worker, sitting in the role of executive director. Jane, too, is a social worker, and we both have worn many hats, from leadership to management to direct care. And I think part of what we both feel really strongly about is bringing that to everything we do.
It's so important. It is really important, because it takes on the life of the company or the life of the organization, I think. And and what better thing for those we're serving to see,
I think
wonderful.
You can see it and feel it in the energy of Jane and her team, who are, the primary social workers. So I'll let Jane talk a little bit about her role.
Wonderful. Thanks, Megan.
It's all about me, because it's social work. Okay, so it's all about me. But what Megan's talking about is I was the third employee of Gallagher Hospice. I'm actually contemplating retirement at that point. Let's not get into age. So I very much was interested in becoming a part of the growth of the company, and as a social worker, and I did backup bereavement, and I did backup spiritual care. I had lots of qualities I didn't know I had at the very beginning. But to watch it grow from myself doing a little bit of everything delivering bedpans, delivering pull-ups, delivering whatever it took for families as we started to add the critical team members, the nurses, the aides, the volunteer program, start everything, to now the social work department has 4 individuals.
Oh, wow.
And bereavement is growing with just hiring a second person. We now have 2 chaplains. Our volunteers have recruited anybody I've known that's my age that's retired. I'm trying to get in there with us. But as your evolution was remarkable with goals, it was lovely to see this company grow with a reputation of excellent end-of-life care.
Yeah,
working with the resources in the community who now very much trust us, when at the beginning you still are proving a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Oh, that's and we all know in Pittsburgh, that's hard to do with a new hospice because there are so many hospices in the Pittsburgh area.
There are.
It just amazes me in Pennsylvania how many hospices there are compared to other states. And, so well done. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it has been, part of that is our aging population here, especially in this part of the state. And hospice in general, people have a better understanding of the fact that it is support for dying with dignity and dying in the place that you call home. So we have more people across the country, more people than ever utilizing the hospice benefit. The one thing that still is a bit of a myth is that it's for the very end of life. So people, are accessing hospice very, very late.
Yes.
Where we could provide a lot more support to the caregivers, especially if we were involved a little sooner in someone's terminal illness. But our role, no matter when, where, or how someone comes to us, is to make sure that we are doing the best we can to give them as many good days as possible, for as long as that might be. And a great deal of that is the caregiving.
Yeah. Well, right. We use that oxygen mask, metaphor here all the time with our caregivers. That when you're on a flight and the cabin loses oxygen and air pressure, you got to attend to yourself first before you attend to the person sitting with you, and that's easier said than done.
Easier said than done.
It is.
I think in hospice, even as much or any when any person is a caregiver, it doesn't matter the type of their role, large or small, it is a very difficult job for so many reasons, but it gets minimized. People focus on the patient or the person with heavy care needs, and the caregiver is busy holding that all up. And for us in hospice, one of the eligibility criteria in order for someone to come onto hospice is that they have a caregiver.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of misconception about how much caregiving that person really has to do. Yeah. And they are it. They are the unsung hero.
Call. Yep.
And they are doing the care. Yep. We are a support to them. We aren't the primary caregiver. They are. And so we really, it is just talking about caregiving. We could not do what we do without there being a caregiver.
Right.
And so it takes on a really monumental role, and sometimes it's hard for us to explain how much that might be, because it varies from situation to situation.
Yeah, everybody's situation is different. Yeah.
But it is a monumental role.
Yeah, it is. You're right. And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's not just physically exhausting, it's emotionally and mentally exhausting. We hear sometimes caregivers that we support and help through Hope Grows that, I just placed mom or dad into a facility, so I'm no longer a caregiver. And I'm like, oh, yes, you are. And they ask, well, why? I'm not doing the work anymore. And I said, well, are you calling the facility in the morning to check on how they did through the night? Or are you thinking about how they did through the night? Yes. And then I'll say, are you going to bed at night making sure in your brain or your heart that everything went well and that you're worried about how they're going to get through the night? Yes. That's what we call emotional hypervigilance. And you have
just
not
gonna say that
stopped
emotional
thinking about them or
burden
feeling
doesn't
about
go
them.
away.
No,
We
it
say,
does not.
we say, you know, you might not be carrying the physical load anymore, but you are carrying that emotional load.
Yeah.
That doesn't go away.
No,
Yeah.
it does not go away. No, no.
Being an advocate is 24/7, regardless of where the destination or setting is. They just really look at the physical care within the home. And you're right, it's so underestimated when people say, oh, I'm going to take care of them. I want them to die at home, and we're ready for this. And if we had to count how many times people said, oh, I never thought about that. Oh, I didn't realize this. Oh, I'm a terrible caregiver because I got upset or I got mad or I'm losing patience. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And to reinforce to them that is okay and is going to be part of their role without being defined as a poor caregiver.
Right. And I think there's this idea too that caregivers, families, especially when they're helping somebody at end of life, that they're supposed to morph into this superhero.
Right.
You know, and I always say, you know, when they feel bad that they've lost their temper or, you know, they said something that hurt or whatever, it's like, well, you're human.
Right.
You know, it's okay to be human, and, you know, look at that as maybe a sign that you need to open your heart and your door to more support. You know, and that's hard though. It is so hard to do.
And we have no way of anticipating what their needs are going to be.
Oh,
so
you
how
can't.
can anyone? You are not superhuman. You are not omniscient.
Right.
And to your point, you know, we are doing the best we can.
Yeah.
With the situation right in front of us. And for everyone that looks a little different. And we always say, you are giving pure gift. It is the best you can do.
That's a good way to put that. Yeah,
it's
I like
pure
that.
gift. And when you are doing it out of love and care and concern, none of us is perfect. We're going to fall down. That doesn't mean tomorrow you can't start all over again. But I do think they have to have that permission to know that this is a heavy lift. And no one is expecting, none of us are perfect. None of us would know. I mean, even as much as I'm around it all, you know, when your loved one is dying, you don't know what's going to come up.
You don't.
You don't know what it's going to look like, not physically, not emotionally, not, you know.
Well, it's just like, you know, when you're a mother and you give birth to a baby, that baby doesn't pop out with instructions for that child. You know, sometimes I wish it would. Like, this is my personality, and if you do this, this will happen, but it doesn't work that way. But I often say that though with you know, caregivers, like we didn't grow into our adult life with instructions on how to do any of this.
That's right.
You know, unless you've gone to school to be a nurse's aide or a nurse or a social worker or a counselor, like we're not you know, you don't know, and it's okay to not know.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, yeah. But I think though caregivers need to be reminded of these things.
They sure do.
You know, but
and they need to know how valuable that gift they're giving is.
Yes.
Just,
yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's lost in the strain and stress. You know, in the day-to-day grind of it.
That's exactly
right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so one things I'd like to ask is what's inspired you to be in this line of work? But I don't know. I think maybe we've kind of summed that all up in just our conversation. But is there anything that you'd like to add about the inspiration, you know, that you get from doing the work that you do?
I had a personal experience, to be honest with you, because which made me go into the hospice world when I would not have thought that would have been the direction I went in. Was what I thought was, as I get older, defining my parents' age of having both on hospice down in Florida and being the long distance caregiver. My mother, very young, early 70s, got on hospice. And as we were taking care of my mother, I thought my dad, the main caregiver, started to look actually awful. And then we found out he had a terminal, non-treatable leukemia. So I was juggling both at the time. And that just made me a little inspirational, because I think as a daughter, when you're always a daughter first and caregiver and then a professional, just made me sort of say, I actually can feel this. Maybe I will be more beneficial because I had a difficult bereavement because they died 3 months apart, and I couldn't grieve one before the other died, and then I was mad I lost both of them, and went through all these things I tell people not to go through, I went through, but I think that probably led me to it, to feel like I can honestly stand there as I listen, and I hear the needs. I can feel it again. I can feel it again. It's something you don't forget. It doesn't impede what you're able to provide. It just touches your heart again because you did it.
That is
long distance caregiving.
That, that is so true. Just personal experience can inspire us to do the work that we do, and thanks for sharing that. I'm sure it's hard. It's hard to relive, or talk about, past experiences that we've had that, touch us enough to do the work now that you've been doing. So how about you, Megan? Is there anything you would like to add?
It was not, when I got into hospice, it was very, very early in my career. And people kept saying, you're in your early 20s. What's making you deal with end of life? Right? Because you're a conversation stopper. When you say what you do.
That is so true. I've often said that we as a nation spend billions of dollars a year to bury our dead, but yet we have so much trouble
we
having
can't talk about
a roundtable conversation about it
prior.
Yes.
And I think for me, it was about the meaningfulness of the work. Again, as a social worker in that background with counseling and where it was, in my mind, you talked a little about ushering, babies into the world, and in my mind, the bookends of life, how we usher people in. Ushering them out should be just as important as how we usher them in. And I fell into it because my mom was a hospice volunteer when I was in college. And she and I were studying some of the same things at the time. She was getting her degree in theology and chaplaincy. And so I interned at a hospice before I even decided to get my master's in social work. And there was an incredible... Bailey Gordon was the executive director at that time for family hospice, and I loved every one of the social work roles and the counseling roles in hospice and everything it entailed, the combination of the medical and the psychosocial support combined to care for not just the patient but the unit of care, which involves the caregivers. And for me, I just never left it in my career. I've done some hospital settings and palliative care and hospice the majority of my career. And for me, it's just about how meaningful and profound. Every time we journey with someone, we feel like it is a true honor and privilege.
So much so, yes.
And I think if we ever lose that, then you're not in the right place.
That's good for if we have some listeners that are in the helping profession. That's profound for them to hear.
It is, and I feel like now we've really got a great group of folks, and to be sort of in that other half for me of my career, it's really nice to be supporting also some other people who may be new to hospice and why we find the work so profound and compelling, and just pulling out of people what they can bring to it and what we can bring to the families that we work with.
That's great.
It's been a real honor.
and that's supportive for those professionals that are working for this hospice, to have leaders such as you to have that experience and to be able to look deeper into their profession as that helper to help to support them along that journey, because we do get burnt out, we get tired.
We do. It's hard work to carry, like as James was saying, or even you were saying, to carry. And what they do is they listen, right? When you're listening, you're carrying, you're unburdening for someone, and so for them to recognize the profound work they are doing too to support caregivers and patients,
And early in Megan's career, and the individual that inspired her, Bailey Gordon, that she's talking to, believe this or not, Lisa, when you talk about what a small world it is, I went to graduate school with Bailey Gordon, and she when she was saying she was going into the hospice world, I was saying, what? What? Because at that time, from a social work perspective, I was going to save the world of long-term care. Okay. I was going to be a nursing home administrator, and people were not going to think that going into a nursing home was actually worse than dying.
Yeah.
I was, and I'm looking hospice, and here we are, all knowing each other, all working together, all still trying to provide that quality end-of-life journey for the patients and the families. And Megan brought up something that made me think when you talk about employees that work for our hospice, but hospices in general. It still never ceases to amaze me when family members will say to you, whether it being in the middle of the process, whether it being after the death, whether it'll be a funeral visitation, when they say, I don't know how you do what you do. You're angels. How do you do what you do? And if you ever want to stop people with the gift of talk or anybody in their tracks, it's to try and answer that, because we don't think we do anything any different than what we want to do and what our goals are for that patient and family, and meet them so that their grief process and their lifetime memory book is such that it's more positive than any kind of negative experience.
Jane brings up a point. It's something we hear over and over and over, which is, and if I had a dime for every time I had a family member say, I wish we had known about you sooner, or I wish Gallagher Hospice had come into our life a little sooner. Most of the time, people are incredibly thankful for the service they have, just didn't know what it might mean. And I think when you say, they didn't really know what it would entail or what it looks like and what the service in terms of support might mean. We hear it over and over. I wish we had done it sooner.
And I what I'm teaching at Robert Morris is grief counseling, and we talk about end of life, and I always bring that up, that, and I don't know if it's our medical practice, because they're taught to cure, that they have a hard time taking a step back to say, I'm done curing. It's now time to care. And there's definitely still, I think, a disconnect between the medical community and seeing end of life. And referring sooner, because I know when I worked with all of you at Harmony Hospice, it was the same thing. People would come on, and a week later the person is gone, and it's like, oh my gosh, they could have been here for months. Could have been a long time.
Even nationally, the average length of stay is still really short.
Is it? Okay.
It's like 46. And I do think part of that is twofold. I have some physicians who will say, hey, it's patients and families who continue to want more. But I also think it's twofold of physicians. But there's always one more treatment. We can treat until we can treat forever. The question that I think patients and families have a hard time getting at is, what would the cost of that look like? Because people are not apt to be told the prognosis in a clear way. And
I think so too.
Pros and cons of what that next thing might look like. And generally, of course, if they say, well, what do you think we should do? What's best? And someone says, well, I think you should do this. They just go with that, because no one's had that experience before. This is the first time we're facing this information and what it's going to look like. And,
absolutely.
And so it is very difficult to then sort out, because you don't know, well, if we do that, what does that look like? Or so when you're saying it's stage 4 cancer and it's not curable, but you're going to treat with this. Well, yes, because that treatment might do this. Instead, they said, boy, if I'd have known it was really only 6 months, I think we'd have done something different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's hard to get at that. There's no.
It is, but I think though, because of our medical community being, people that cure, we hold out hope, right? That you're going to wake up tomorrow and you're going to see on the news new treatment that's working, or a new this that's going to reverse this, or whatever. And I think we've just been conditioned really to just expect. And don't get me wrong, I mean, Hope Grows is all about hope.
Right. But it's not mutually exclusive. You can still have hope.
You can.
Always.
You can. You're right. Yeah. But I think too, it's just, I think hope is just we're just conditioned
Yeah.
to have hope in ways that might not necessarily be the best.
Yeah.
Because there's not, because we're prolonging our life for what reason? We could probably talk for hours based on this topic of death and dying. In fact, I would love to continue that conversation with people. Maybe that's our next roundtable series is death and dying,
discussion.
Oh, absolutely. Because you could take the caregiver statement, very simple statement, and do an entire discussion on, I wanted to make sure I did everything. Well, sometimes doing everything can be very painful, can be very, we can lose quality time just justifying why we thought we should continue to do everything.
Absolutely. Oh, I so agree with you on that. Yeah.
And there's never, people should never feel there's any blame in that. Again, people are making the best decision as they can with what's in front of them. I just think as a whole,
absolutely. Yeah.
there just
No
needs
blame
to be
here,
more communication
about it. Yeah, there
Mm-hmm.
does. I agree. There just has to be more communication. But so in kind of moving on from that, like, what do you think the best family resources are right now for caregivers? And obviously your experience is at end of life because of working in hospice here. So maybe that's the approach that you take in answering that question. What do you think the best resources are for caregivers at this point?
I think the big, and I'm going to bring in COVID. I didn't want to talk about COVID because I think in the last 365 days, everybody is tired of discussing what COVID did.
I'm sure.
But what it did from a caregiving standpoint is we couldn't even do respite to relieve a caregiver under the Medicare hospice benefit. Not seeing family members, not doing this, not doing that. It was something that people didn't feel were options that we could have utilized that and had that discussion. With COVID restrictions, people were afraid to have caregivers, private caregivers, agency caregivers into their homes. Family members with restrictions within the United States of traveling in to be able to just relieve a caregiver wasn't the option. They were scared to fly. I don't think people felt that 2020 to 21 was a year with any resources of any kind except themselves and the immediate family that they trusted that were in the area. And I also think it was a little demanding, if you will, on the hospice employees to really want to do more because we didn't have the resources we usually pull from, or we couldn't just use a respite. God forbid a medical problem happened to the caregiver, Lisa, as you talked about before.
Sure.
So the resources in the community were a little bit different. Adult daycares sort of shut down, and that was something some folks relied on 1 or 2 days a week.
Right. So the strain and stress of not only just the family caregiver, but your professional caregivers as well has just, it probably tripled. The stress and the demands.
It absolutely has.
So you probably are seeing a lot of fatigue.
A great deal of fatigue.
Yeah, I know. Compassion fatigue is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And it's a real thing. And
it is a real thing.
It is a real thing, and I think people underestimate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's one of the things, Jane and the other social workers at Gallagher Hospice, is one of the things they go in with, right? With their aim, they're not physically, assessing the patient. They are emotionally assessing the patient and caregiving situation, and then looking for those resources. And those resources got smaller, as Jane pointed out.
Sure.
We do often, point out, though, the need for respite, the need for support. Maybe you're doing the job, 24/7, but now the caregiving is pretty rough and you need to sleep. You need to take care of yourself. You need to put that oxygen mask on. So we are suggesting perhaps, Gallagher's private duty caregiving for maybe a shift of time to give you that break. Maybe it's other resources Jane pointed out. Tapping into that other family member who you have and that can give you that break. What are the resources that will keep you whole? Because if you fall down, then the whole...
everything crumbles. Yeah, everything crumbles because you're basically the rock at the bottom holding it all together.
That's exactly right.
And I think safety was not everything everybody thought about when you think about caregiving, but it was a safety issue. Well, nobody was vaccinated until the start of the healthcare workers back at the beginning of January. So what kind of COVID testing are you giving? Well, how can you attest to this? And before it used to be background checks, and it used to be, drug testing. It used to, all of a sudden, safety for the family members because they were so apprehensive and frightened.
Yeah, rightly so.
And they're elderly a lot
rightly
too.
so. Yeah. So you've just had a whole host of other piled up issues on top of all of it. Well, I know I often think about working more intimately with the different hospices in Pittsburgh once, the Iris Respite House that we're sitting in opens up as the overnight rest for that caregiver. We've been delayed now a whole year of opening. So we're looking now at the end of December to open the doors for family caregivers to take a break away overnight. So once, everybody starts getting back into that, I can so see that when families, it's suggested that the family member put their loved one in respite for 4 or 5 days to take that breakaway overnight. I just think hospice in general is just a perfect stream of support, between us and Hope Grows, you guys and Hope Grows. I think that caregivers are really going to be able to benefit even more. And what a year to come out of to be able to do that, I think is, sometimes timing in life happens the way it's supposed to happen, I guess.
True.
I don't know. I often think about that. Is there anything that you haven't shared today that you'd like to share?
I would say the one thing, I know I said it earlier, but I just don't think we can stress enough how amazing I think caregivers are.
Oh, yes.
I mean, we wouldn't make it. People wouldn't be able to age in place the way they do, to stay in their home as long as they can. I think people are incredibly resilient. I know that word is getting tossed around a lot, but to be able to provide caregiving at any point in time is just such a monumental gift. And so if you are a caregiver, I will say this, Gallagher Hospice, our hats are off to all the caregivers out there, because
so yes.
You make the world go round. Caregivers make the world a better place for anyone in their orbit. And you really are the unsung heroes.
I think so too. I'd have to agree with and ditto on that. Yeah.
And I think during this last year, when it was difficult, as we have respected and just admired our caregivers during this last year, I think an intervention that we didn't do as much, but that COVID pointed out to us from a professional standpoint, is to continue to call those caregivers with support calls, to continue the reinforcement. This is not a pep rally, and we don't have pom-poms. Yeah. But there is a very genuine meaning behind our phone calls to say you're okay. We're 24/7. We're there for you. You're doing it. We're thanking you, and we're just right beside you during this. Yeah. And I thought this past year how I maybe should, when I self-reflect on my delivery of care for outcomes, I wish I would have been doing it just a little bit more. Aww. COVID taught me that. Do it a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, as bad as COVID was, or still is, I really think there's a lot of good things that have happened.
I know, right? There are a lot of silver linings.
There was, I think, like for us especially, most of our programming and most of our work that we do with our caregivers has been in person. And this, COVID proved that we can do everything virtual, which we did. Like all of our programming and support groups, everything just went completely virtual in a week's time.
I know.
Like it just happened, and it's like, bam, we're doing it.
It might not be perfect, but
right. But what we learned from that is our numbers of people getting that support increased.
Because I do think there's a certain percentage, especially for your caregivers, to get somewhere is really difficult.
Correct.
But if they can do it from their dining room table, and if they had to get up and go into the other room, they could.
Exactly. So I don't see, that's the one good thing. I don't see our service. I mean, we're starting to do more in-person support groups again, but I don't see our services, though, changing much from the virtual part of it, because we are reaching those that couldn't get care replacement to come.
That makes sense to me.
You know, so, but, you know, the property here, though, with the healing and restorative gardens, though, even though we've done some virtual garden walks that have been viewed, I still think there's something to be missing
about that,
about not being in person, but we'll get there again. You know, we'll get there again, but I don't think the virtual will ever go away. Is the point that I'm making. But this was phenomenal, having you guys here sharing about what it is you do and just the personal side of you know, the support you provide to not only those at end of life, but the family and caregivers that are surrounding that end of life. And you know, I just love working with you guys. I think it's just amazing, you know, that we're reconnected again after all these years. And so to let your viewers and listeners know, how can somebody reach out to Gallagher Hospice?
You can reach us by phone, Gallagher Hospice at 412-279-4255. You can go on our website, www.gallagherhospice.com. All it takes is a phone call, and we will lead you from there.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to point out too, I know that you both are representing hospice, but Gallagher also has a line of other supports.
We have been privileged. Gallagher Home Health has actually been in the community for over 15 years, and they have an incredible staff of nurses, therapists, PT, OT, speech, aides, wound care. So any home health needs, skilled need you might have from discharging from the hospital, or a physician thinks that the person needs. They also have private duty. So if your caregivers need a break and they need some private duty caregivers to come into the home, they have a private duty caregiver. So that's Gallagher Home Care. And then we are the third leg of the stool there, if you will, at Gallagher Hospice. So we really have an umbrella of care.
Wonderful. So if somebody called the number that you just gave didn't need end of life,
we will get them directly where they need to go.
All right, perfect. So I won't bog them down with other phone numbers then.
Yep.
But yeah, okay, wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh,
thank you
gosh,
very
much.
You.
Yeah.
Good to have you here.